Hello and welcome to Films and That. My name's Rob Turnbull.
My name's Sam Hall.
And today we are doing something a bit different. We're not looking at a film, we're looking at a game or a series of games, aren't we? We're looking at Legacy of Kain.
Yeah. Don't know if we're going to look at any other games in future. We probably will, but I suppose, this is the first time we're exploring the and that aspect.
We're both big fans of this series.
Yeah. I was obsessed with it at some point when I was a teenager, so...
Yeah, and one thing to note is that it really goes down the narrative aspect of storytelling rather than the gameplay. We're not going to cover any gameplay elements, really.
Well, maybe like minor, but yeah, we're mainly going to focus on the story and gameplay and how well the narrative works, and even some of the interesting aspects of the narrative.
Great. Okay, let's get into it.
Okay. Our first dive into the Legacy of Kain series is Blood Omen. In this game, we follow Kain, a nobleman turned vampire seeking revenge against those who ordered his untimely murder.
This review contains spoilers. Okay, so the first thing that we need to mention, I think, is that there is a lot of complicated narrative in this. So we're probably better off starting with setting the scene, I think.
Setting the location,
Yeah.
the world that this whole place is based, like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, anything like that. It's got quite a huge world that they built over the course of 5 games that you kind of learn more and more about as it goes on.
Yeah, so it's set in Nosgoth, a fictional medieval world. Vampires and monsters exist in this world, and the health of the world seems intrinsically linked to these pillars, which are the centre of everything, really.
Like literal pillars that expand up all the way up into the sky and are supposed to go sort of deep into the ground.
If these pillars fall into decay, then the world falls into decay, and like monsters come from other dimensions and things like that. So it's in everyone's best interest to keep these pillars maintained, basically.
Yeah, and they sort of embody different elements, I suppose, of not like Earth, Wind and Fire, things like, was it mind, time, death, balance, dimension, things like that. But I guess as we go through the course of this series, the main ones to focus on, I suppose, are the balance pillar and the time pillar.
The pillars choose guardians to protect them, and they choose them from birth. And my understanding is that each of these guardians, they have certain powers that link in with whichever pillar they are guarding. So like time, for instance, you can see through time, you can travel through time. Yeah,
I mean, nature can probably summon, I don't know, plants that eat people.
Rabbits.
Rabbits, yeah.
Are these guardians, they won't die from old age and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah. It's implied that they're essentially immortal, but they can be killed through injury. Although they're human, aren't they? So it's unusual that they're immortal. It sort of gives them this eternal life, I suppose.
So before the game starts, we're treated to this prologue, where a vampire Vorador is killing some of the members of the Circle in response to how they've sanctioned a war against the vampires, basically. They created this holy order of Sarafan warriors to hunt down and kill these vampires.
Yeah. And then 500 years later, when the game starts...
So that's just the setup for the game, basically. So, yeah.
The thing that kind of sets everything into motion is that another one of the Guardians is killed, the Balance Guardian.
The Balance Guardian is Ariel, and her lover is Nutpraptor, who is also a guardian.
He's the guardian of the mind, yeah. He knows that, or believes that one of the other guardians has murdered Ariel, and because he doesn't know which one, he just corrupts their minds and goes mad himself, doesn't he?
Yeah, so it kind of like they explain it as his madness overflows into the other ones.
Yeah.
So they all become crazy, they all become corrupt, and in return the pillars become corrupt, and the world starts to decay.
So already you can see there's quite a convoluted, complicated plot that doesn't make a great deal of sense, but
for a game as well, to like unload all this information into a player before they've even started playing is quite a lot, and it's very unusual for a game, I would say.
I think it took me a while to kind of get on board all of this, what was just happening. At that point in my life, I was so used to just diving into games, and not giving a shit about what was going on.
Well, this is the thing. Games usually don't spend too long on the story elements, do they? It's more just like...
I mean, maybe more so these days, but certainly at the time it came out, not at all, really.
Dear Mario, please come to the castle. I have baked a cake for you.
I mean, it must have been quite a big task, really, to take on. When it just seems so convoluted, the plot. But at the same time, that's why I love it.
Yeah, me too. And I think I only really understood it from researching it on my own after I played the games.
But
so,
I wanted to,
yeah,
and I assume you did too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really go into too much detail about when these things happen. You have to kind of read between the lines some of the times, which it makes it unique as a series.
Yeah.
The tavern's closing. Best be on your way, stranger. What? No mug of ale for a weary traveller from distant Corhagen? I can reward you well, for I am of noble blood.
When we start to play the game, we're introduced to our protagonist, Kain, who is a nobleman, and he's quite arrogant at this point, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a bit of a meanie. At this point, anyway. Because he becomes so lovely later on.
Yeah.
And almost instantly, which is also a moment maybe that frustrated you as it did me, you're killed.
End it! Now!
But you can fight off your attackers, but it's like to no avail.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, I just died at the beginning of the game.
It's one of these, supposed to lose fights that happens in game, where it just makes you feel like you failed.
Yeah. As opposed to Dark Souls, where you just really have failed.
Yeah. So Kain doesn't die though, does he? He's given the chance to come back as a vampire by Mortanius, the guardian of death. Mm-hmm. And so without really thinking about it, he takes this opportunity to get revenge. So the whole thing's motivated by revenge initially, isn't it?
Yes. It also makes it interesting. It's just one of these pure vampires, I suppose you can call them. The idea, because, vampires are supposed to create other vampires. But a pure vampire is someone who's a vampire that's been born a vampire, essentially. Or, become a vampire through other means other than being infected.
I had crossed death for this moment. My mind was empty save for one thought. I would kill.
And so he quickly hunts down and kills his murderers. That happens very quickly.
Yeah, so then I guess the plot becomes the whole the unravelling of a kind of conspiracy, isn't it? That trying to find out why you were killed. And understanding the conspiracy behind it, and you're prompted to do this by the ghost of the aforementioned Ariel.
Yeah, so she gives you this task that in order to save Nosgoth, the guardians of the pillars need to be killed so that the pillars can choose new guardians who are not corrupted, and then the pillars will be restored, and then the world will be nice again.
I feel like what's interesting about this is it's kind of the whole thing. It's like character building of Kain, because Kain is someone who did not care about who lived or died. He did not care about anything other than himself in life, and immediately he's been brought back as a vampire without thinking about the consequences of that, all because he wanted revenge. And then as soon as he gets revenge, he's suddenly got to think about, where do I go now? I'm something that I detest.
I seek only a cure.
There is no cure for death, only release. You must destroy the sorcery that is now poisoning Nosgoth.
And now he's faced with being involved in this larger plot to save the world. So he does agree to this. He does go around, and the game then follows you hunting down these 9 guardians, basically, is the plot.
What's interesting as well is at the time, if you'd have played any other games, again, you would have thought, okay, so that's 9 bosses then. That is initially what happens. To sort of mix things up a bit and make the plot more interesting, one of the guardians, Malek, you go to kill him, and you don't defeat him, and he escapes. And then, so you've got to spend another part of the game trying to find out where he's gone. And you're thinking, okay, this isn't how it normally works. And things like this keep on happening, and then you find that the things like you end up fighting some of the guardians all in one area.
Yeah.
And then you find out that you have other tasks that you need to complete that are almost unrelated to this, or not that related.
Yeah. Something I wanted to bring up is that you bump into Vorador at one point, and you have a conversation with him, and whereas Kain kind of detests being a vampire and sees it as a curse, Vorador sees it as a blessing. And he sees vampires as being gods.
Vorador thought my curse a blessing, that we were gods. that mortals offered their blood as sacrifice so that we could enjoy our supernatural powers.
It's really interesting comparing this to something like Lord of the Rings, where all the hobbits are all nice and then all the orcs are all evil. In this, it's much more grey. So like some vampires are quite arrogant and horrible, whereas some aren't. And the same with the humans. There's a lot of horrible humans in this game. Yeah, and the vampires are always kind of referred to as being persecuted by the Sarafan, aren't they? Because they can't really help the way they are.
Yeah.
But then they need to kill humans in order to exist. So that's why the humans hate them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of references actually to history. I mean, there's references to Vlad the Impaler, because the vampires are sort of put on spikes, aren't they?
And at one point we discover that the nemesis from the north, who used to be William the Just, basically, who turned into this tyrant, he's amassed this army and he's coming down south to take over Nosgoth.
Yeah, so it's just another like, oh great, okay, another person I've got to kill that's taking me off the main plot. At least that's your initial thinking anyway.
You rally an army with the help of King Otmar and fight the Nemesis' army, but you end up losing this fight. And King Otmar dies and his armies get scattered. So you escape with the help of this time streaming device that you found from the Time Guardian, basically. This is where it gets interesting. Because you've got this gothic plot set in the medieval times, and then you introduce this time travel plot, which is taken straight out of Back to the Future.
Yeah, and it's funny actually, it's quite late in the game, but it is like you said, it's when it gets interesting. So what you do is you think, okay, how do I kill Hitler? I know, I'll go back in time and kill Hitler. It's before he's done all these horrible things. So, go back in time to kill William the Just before he became a tyrant. Go back to the present, and what do you find out?
That he's become a martyr. Because he wasn't the tyrant at that point, so he was still William the Just. So people feel that a vampire has killed, their saviour or whatever.
Essentially, this prompts a mass extermination of all vampires. The anti-vampire sentiment is now sort of hyped up to 11. And you find out that you're the last vampire. You witness Vorador seeing him get his head chopped off. And now the whole world essentially falls on top of you and tries to kill you.
And at this point is when you realise that you've been manipulated.
Yeah.
Because you see Mobius, the Time Guardian, at the head of this kind of revolt against the vampires. And because you've been using his time streaming devices, you realise that he's intended for you to go back in time and kill William the Just at that point.
Yeah.
So even though you thought you were forging your own path through this world, Kain has been manipulated. He realises at this point he's just a puppet for other people.
And it turns out he's not the only puppet as well. After you defeat Mobius.
You have seen my plan, vampire, as I've seen your destiny. The future says you die. But I am dead.
Well, you murder him. But he says, but, time is but nothing. You'll see me again, essentially. Yeah. So you kill him, and then you find out that the person who's been sort of behind all the things that motivates the plot, even the murder of Ariel at the beginning, was the very same guy that raised you in the first place.
Yeah.
But not him. Because...
Well, he's been possessed by a dark entity, they call it at this point.
Yeah, okay. So at this point you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, this sounds a bit ridiculous, but... It is, but it's still... The way you play, the way it unfolds in the game, you're still drawn into it.
Yeah, because there are lots of twists and turns, and it's not just a clear cut, you need to do this, this and this. It does take a left turn and become a different game, basically.
I think, which is why I think, if this was made into a film, people would look at the script and they'd say, what the hell is this? And throw it away immediately. It had to be a game, I think. Maybe it could have worked as a long TV show, but I feel like the medium of the game is what brings that narrative alive. Because you're experiencing this as it unfolds, and I think the POV aspect of a game really enhances the enjoyment of all these twists.
Particularly in this one, because the whole point of it is that as Kain, you've been told what to do. You've been told to go here, 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 kill these people, and then all of a sudden it's kind of backfired on you and you've been manipulated.
Yeah.
But as a gamer, you're sitting there being told what to do, go here, kill these people. So you're doing what he's doing basically.
Yeah.
And you get fucked over the same way he does. So
Yeah.
My silencing of Ariel and its calculated repercussions is but the first act in my theatre of Grand Guignol. You have served me well, Kain.
I serve no one.
Yeah, it's part of learning to grow up and learning that life isn't straightforward, and things aren't A to B to C like they are in most games. And again, at this point, most games were like this. End of level boss, end of level boss, end of level boss.
Yeah.
Immediately, this is throwing up in the air and saying, "No, that's not life."
Particularly when Kain eventually kills all the guardians apart from the balance guardian, and then he's like, "Well, who's the balance guardian then?" And they're like, "You are."
Yeah, it turns out after a guardian dies, another one is born. So you think that Ariel was killed like sort of just before the events of the game, but actually she was killed about 30 years before. Kain, it turns out, is 30 years old when he died. So it turns out you are the chosen one. The balance pillar chose you to become a guardian. But when you died, because you came back as a vampire, it wasn't passed on again. And therefore, that also kind of screwed up the system.
Yeah, and more importantly, he was corrupted from birth as well.
Yeah, Kain didn't realise it, but that's why he was such an arsehole in the first place. He was corrupted from birth, which I guess is probably a metaphor, presumably, for something.
So you've never had a chance in your life, basically. You've just been fucked over from the moment you were born.
Yeah.
And people have been misleading you and getting you to do their dirty work for you, and now they give you this option of kill yourself and save Nosgoth so everyone else has a great life, or don't kill yourself and damn Nosgoth to an eternity of ruin. What's interesting, the game gives you the choice at the end to either choose to save Nosgoth or not. And you get two different endings depending on how you've approached the situation. But the canon of the game is that Kain doesn't do that. Kain decides that, you know what, vampires are gods.
I realized that Vorador was correct. We are gods. Dark gods. And it is our duty to thin the herd.
So essentially you bring about the end of the world.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the game.
Because I think that's him kind of taking control of the situation and deciding that he's not going to be manipulated anymore. Because if he decides to kill himself, then he's lost that battle, really, even though everyone else has won at that point. And throughout what he does after Blood Omen, he really kind of has a plan in place, to do things his own way. And to potentially save the world, but find another option that they haven't given him. So find his own option out of the problem.
There are only two sides to your coin.
Apparently, sir. But suppose you throw a coin enough times. Suppose one day it lands on its edge.
I do feel that sometimes, particularly with this version, this one of the game, the first one, it tried to do so many different things that it does get a bit confusing. So that's why it starts off being a hunt for 9 people and then goes off into another dimension, which I thought makes it more interesting. But there's also elements in there which overcomplicate the story, I think.
We definitely. They probably got away with it in a way. But I still was sort of fascinated by it. And there's little things that you don't even realise, little tidbits and things that are thrown in that you think are insignificant, and it turns out that they're brought back later on.
Yes, these weapons you've provided will see to that. Pray tell, Mobius, what game do you play?
None, my lord. I only wish to aid you in vanquishing your foes. The weapons are but a token of my goodwill.
When Kain goes back in time to kill William the Just, Mobius makes sure that both of them are armed with the Soul Reaver, different versions of the Soul Reaver. And again, that becomes incredibly important to why he needed to do that later on. But do you feel like those things were added and then they were retconned later on? No one planned that out, do you think?
I think it was retconned later on. I think it was, I feel like that the writers of Lost could have done with these people on their team, because these were people who could take a sort of story that nobody knows anything about and actually turn it into something.
Something interesting.
Yeah.
Not just there was a zoo on an island for some reason.
Guys, this isn't just a bear. It's a polar bear.
This team just became very good in the end at taking a mess and making sense of it.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that's what Blood Omen is. It's a mess, but they've made sense of it.
Yeah. And would you even say, though, that the Saw Reaver is actually that integral to this game?
The sword, no.
It's just the ultimate power sword, isn't it?
Well, it was just a sword that you could use or not use at that point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But then in the canon of it, Kain used that sword at that point. Definitely retcon, because there's too much planning there for it not to be retconned, I think.
Yeah.
Reputed to have been ripped from the chest of the greatest vampire to have ever existed, Janos Audron, the Heart of Darkness restores vampiric unlife.
Yeah, it's good to pay the baddie, really, isn't it? Someone that is morally dubious, even though he can't help it at this point.
Yeah, there's a wonderful moment where he wants to go and talk to this king that he needs to help out fight William the Just.
Yeah.
And there's this guard who says, "You're not coming through," and he says, "Oh, out of my way," and he knocks him out of the way, and this guy makes a kind of Monty Python-esque ooh noise as he knocks him out of the way.
The king says no one. He is in mourning for the princess.
He'll be in mourning for his kingdom soon, and he'll mourn for you even sooner if you don't get out of my way.
Ooh.
But it's just a demonstration of Kain's character and how he does not really care about innocent lives. He's a guy who's willing to get stuff done, I suppose, and he does not care who he hurts on the way.
Yeah, and voiced by Simon Templeman. We need to mention that there's a lot of good voice dialogue in this, voice acting.
Yes. Does the guy that does Mobius, does he come back later?
No, I think it's a different guy.
Okay, but Simon Templeman, it becomes like the centre of this series.
The cheese should not be divided.
Simon Templeman really sort of heightens the game and really sort of, I think, raises above some of the dialogue, which it can be a little bit cheesy in this game.
Yeah, but they've gone down a kind of Shakespearean route of kind of highfalutin dialogue rather than just, oh, I need to go here to kill this guy.
Malek's bastion, perched defiantly on the mountaintop, black as night against a blanket of snow. What manner of man would choose a land so harsh and utterly devoid of life?
All games at that point were sort of known for being kind of cheesy and over the top and trying to aim at kids mainly, you know. So this one was just trying to up the ante and go a completely different direction and get people who are a bit more interested in I don't want to say highbrow literature because it's still kind of pulpy.
Yeah.
But you know, just something for a bit more aimed at adults and people who like to read a bit more, you know.
Well, exactly, and there's a lot of horrific violence in this, which I didn't remember going back and researching it for this episode. Like some of the spells that you can cast are just horrific. Like one of them, you shrink someone's skin down until they explode.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Of all the methods I employ, this is perhaps the cruelest, causing my victim's body to shrink on itself, crushing bones and rupturing organs till the pressure inside bursts the sack of fleshy skin, spraying its contents for all to see.
There's stuff like that, and there's a lot of dark themes as well. There's one point when you go through a village, I think it's meant to be your hometown, and it's affected by a plague, and most of the people are dead, you know, and you're going through this town, and it's horrific, you know. You really get this sense that this world is broken as you're walking through it, you know. There's not a little happy town anywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere there's some kind of sadness, even the sort of the place of the king that you get to help you. Like even there's this sadness because the king's daughter is in a coma or whatever. And ultimately, like nobody really wants to thank you for helping them because you're a vampire. There's not a feeling that everything's all right after.
This is why it makes that end decision all the more interesting. Because you can either get no thanks and people hate you and die, but then you save everyone, or you could just live your own life in this ruin. Because Kain makes his new empire basically in the seat of the broken pillars. So his decision completely destroys the pillars and completely destroys Nosgoth from any hope of rebuilding.
Maybe that's sort of talking about the legacy of history. Maybe that's part of the name. Could you become one who rules all over and have your name be a curse? Or could you die no one, but help the world, you know? Quite often, people who do bad things are held as heroes, and people who do some of the most wonderful things get completely lost in history, even if that thing makes quite a huge difference. And it's all about his legacy, you see. The legacy of Kain.
I get it.
In his life, he was unknown, a petty noble. In death, he was unknown. Yet by choosing oblivion, he restored balance to the land. Shades cast no shadows.
What did you think of this game, Sam?
At the time, I was totally fine with the gameplay, actually. Let me start that again, because that's kind of not entirely true. I certainly had my issues with the gameplay, but I still really enjoyed it. Particularly, I think that the powers that you get as a vampire, you know, the idea of turning into mist to overcome certain obstacles. You could become a bat to sort of travel to locations that you wouldn't be able to get to by foot. Things like that entered into it, and also the magical powers you get as well as your character. I loved all that stuff. I loved that you could add new armor to your character as the game went on. So I love the customizery aspect. But most of all, and I think everybody agrees with this, is that it's the story that really drew me in, and the way that it plays out through the game, so that you experience it in a way that you wouldn't have usually experienced a game at that time.
Yeah, the story is definitely the big sell for this game. If it wasn't in there, we wouldn't be talking about it at all.
No.
I think gameplay-wise, it is a bit of a mess, and it is very dated. And I think story-wise, it is a bit of a mess as well. So it does kind of tighten. The story elements do get tightened later on.
Although I really enjoy talking about this one, I'm sort of looking forward to talking about certainly at least two of the sequels a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're thinking about the same ones, because I am feeling the same as well. It does get a lot more interesting, and this is more of a springboard, I think, to the other games, which I much prefer.
Play on, little vampire. Play on.
Ve Victus!
Okay, that's it for this time on Films and That. Thanks for watching and subscribing. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye. Ve Victus. I thought I'd get it in before you did.
Yeah. So that is one thing that annoys me about the game, is the repetitive sound effects. How many times does he say that? Pretty much every time you kill someone.
Ve Victus! Ve Victus! Ve Victus! Ve Victus. Suffering to the conqueror.